The sky was red like fire, and the air carried a heavy smell of dust and storm. The planet of Arcanus was no place for the weak. Its land was filled with sharp rocks, poisonous plants, and monstrous creatures that walked, crawled, and flew. It was a world where every day was a battle for survival. On this world, a small figure stumbled across the barren ground. Her skin was pale blue, her hair long and silver like a stream of light. She was not human. She belonged to the Carrion, a race known for their cold pride and unyielding strength. Yet this girl, barely past childhood, was considered too weak, too fragile. Her people had abandoned her. The Carrion ship had landed only hours before, but it had left without her. They had said nothing to her face, only ordered her to step outside during the night when the predators roamed most freely. When she turned back, begging silently, the doors of the ship closed. Then the roar of engines thundered in her ears, and the ship vanished into the stormy skies, leaving her alone. The girl's legs trembled as she tried to walk farther into the wasteland. She had no weapon, no supplies, not even clean water. She had only the thin clothes on her body and her own determination to live. Fear pressed against her chest, but she did not cry. Tears, she had learned, were useless on Arcanus. Instead, she lifted her chin and took another step. From the distance came a sound, a deep growl. Her body froze. Slowly, she turned her head. Out of the fog, a massive beast stepped forward. It was larger than any predator she had seen before, with 4 legs thick as tree trunks and a mouth filled with sharp teeth. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and its breath steamed with heat. The girl's heart raced. She had nothing to fight it with. She had no chance. Instinct told her to run, but she knew the creature was faster. Her mind screamed for help, though she knew no one would answer. The beast lowered its head, ready to strike. At that moment, a new sound cut through the air, loud, sharp, and unfamiliar. A bright flash lit the space beside the creature, and an explosion of dust and sparks followed. The beast roared in pain and anger, turning away from the girl to face this sudden threat. From behind a ridge, a figure appeared. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing armor patched and burned from many battles. His face was hidden under a cracked helmet, but his movements were strong and confident. In his hands he carried a weapon that glowed with power. He fired again, striking the beast's side. The monster bellowed and swung its tail, smashing rocks into pieces. But the man moved quickly, rolling aside and firing again. The girl could only watch in shock. She had never seen anyone fight a creature so fearlessly. Her people would have left her to die. Yet this stranger, this human, had stepped in without hesitation. Finally, with one last shot, the beast fell. Its massive body shook the ground as it collapsed. The air grew still, and silence returned to the wasteland. The man lowered his weapon and turned toward the girl. His helmet reflected the faint red glow of the storm. Slowly he raised one hand, not holding a weapon now, but open, calm, as if to show he meant no harm. The girl's breath caught in her throat. A human. Her people had always spoken of humans as ruthless enemies, clever, dangerous, and impossible to trust. She had heard stories that they burned entire colonies, that they fought like beasts themselves, using cunning instead of honor. The thought of standing near one had once filled her with fear. But this man had saved her. He said something, words she did not understand. His language was strange, heavy, and fast. She shook her head slowly, taking a step back. He paused, then lowered his weapon completely. He reached to his belt and pulled out a small container. He opened it and drank, then extended it toward her. Her throat burned with thirst, but still she hesitated. What if it was poison? What if it was a trick? Her people had abandoned her because they said she was weak. Was she weak if she accepted help? The man did not push her. He simply set the container on a nearby rock and stepped back. His voice softened, though she still could not understand his words. The girl stared at the container for a long moment before finally crawling forward. She lifted it carefully, sniffing the liquid inside. It smelled clean, unlike the bitter water she had tried from the pools of Arcanis. Slowly, she drank. Cool relief filled her body, and she felt strength return to her. When she looked up, the man was watching quietly. His helmet tilted slightly as though he was studying her. She did not know his thoughts, but for the first time since her exile, she did not feel entirely alone. The ground rumbled suddenly. More growls echoed in the distance. The storm was bringing the monsters out again. The man gestured for her to follow. He moved quickly but carefully, leading her toward a rocky outcrop. At first she hesitated, but then the growls grew louder. Fear pushed her forward, and she ran after him. They reached a cave hidden behind jagged stone. The man stepped inside and motioned for her to join. She entered, and together they moved deeper until the sounds of the beast faded outside. Inside the cave, the air was damp but safe. The man removed his helmet, revealing a face scarred yet steady. His hair was dark, his eyes sharp but not unkind. He spoke again, slower this time, as if hoping she would understand. She did not know his words, but she knew his tone. It was not the voice of an enemy. It was the voice of someone who had chosen to protect instead of destroy. The girl sat against the wall, her small frame trembling with exhaustion. The human sat nearby, checking his weapon and scanning the cave entrance. Even in silence, there was a strange comfort in his presence. She thought of her people flying far away, leaving her behind without a second glance. Then she looked at the human, who had risked himself against a monster to save her. A stranger, an enemy, yet the only one who had cared enough to fight for her. Her heart whispered a truth she could not ignore. She had been abandoned by her own kind, but saved by a human, and that, perhaps, meant more than any story she had been told. The night passed slowly inside the cave. The girl could hardly sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the glowing eyes of the beast that had nearly ended her life. But each time she woke in fear, she heard the steady sound of the human breathing nearby. Somehow that sound gave her comfort. When morning came, light from the rising sun shone faintly through cracks in the cave wall. The storm outside had grown weaker, though the roars of distant creatures still echoed across the land. The human was already awake. He sat near the entrance, cleaning his weapon with careful hands. His armor looked damaged in many places, patched together with whatever materials he had found. He did not look like a soldier sent by an army. He looked more like a wanderer who had been fighting for survival on his own. The girl pushed herself up slowly. Her body was stiff from exhaustion, but she felt stronger than yesterday thanks to the water he had given her. She studied him quietly, wondering why he had saved her. Humans in Carrion were enemies. Her people would have left him to die without hesitation. Yet this man had risked his life. The human noticed her gaze. He looked at her for a moment, then gave a small nod as if to say, "You are safe." She lowered her eyes quickly. He spoke a few words, his voice calm and steady. She could not understand, but his tone was not harsh. Then he pointed to himself and said slowly, "Elias." She tilted her head, confused. He repeated it, placing a hand on his chest. "Elias." After a moment, she realized it was his name. Elias. The sound was strange, but it stayed in her mind. He then pointed at her, waiting. She hesitated. Her name felt strange on her tongue after days of silence, but she whispered it softly. "Lyra." Elias smiled faintly. He repeated, "Lyra!" Her heart jumped. It was the first time someone had spoken her name with kindness, since before her people abandoned her. For a while, they sat in silence. Elias opened a small pack beside him. Inside were a few supplies, some dried food, a tool that gave off sparks, and a folded blanket. He broke the food into 2 pieces and held one out to her. Lyra stared at it. She was hungry, but fear still tugged at her. What if it was unsafe? She looked at Elias carefully. He took a bite of his own piece first, chewing calmly, then gestured again for her to eat. Slowly, she accepted. The food was dry but filling, far better than the bitter roots she had tried to chew outside. She ate with small bites while Elias watched the cave entrance, always alert. After they finished, Elias stood and motioned for her to follow. He pointed outside, then to the sky, making a gesture of flying. Lyra understood. He was stranded too and wanted to leave this planet. But without a ship, leaving was impossible. Still, she followed him out of the cave. The land stretched wide before them, endless and harsh. Black rocks jutted from the ground like broken teeth, and thick clouds rolled across the red sky. The wind carried the cries of creatures hunting for prey. Elias moved carefully, checking the ground and scanning the horizon. Lyra followed close, though she stayed a few steps behind. She noticed how he moved with purpose, as if he had done this many times before. Every step he took seemed to have meaning. At one point, Elias stopped and knelt by a patch of strange plants. Their stems glowed faintly with a green light. Lyra gasped and pulled back. She knew these plants. Touching them would burn skin, and their fumes could poison the air. She shook her head quickly, waving her hands to warn him. Elias looked at her, then understood. He nodded and stepped away, giving her a small look of respect. For the first time, Lyra realized she could help him too. She knew the dangers of this land better than he did. She was not just a burden. As the day went on, they faced more dangers. A pack of smaller beasts with sharp claws chased them, forcing Elias to fire his weapon again. The loud blasts scared the creatures away, but each shot drained the energy of his weapon. Lyra could see his concern as he checked the glowing core of the gun. Later, they came across a pool of water. Elias moved to collect some, but Lyra stopped him. She showed him how the water turned black when stirred, a sign of poison. She led him instead to a hidden crack between rocks where cleaner water dripped slowly. It was little, but it was safe. Elias watched her closely, then gave another small nod. This time, his expression held more than respect. It was gratitude. By evening, they returned to the cave. The sky darkened quickly and the howls of night predators rose again. Elias set up a small light from his pack, casting a warm glow on the walls. Lyra sat across from him, hugging her knees. She thought of her people again, how they had left her without care, and she thought of Elias, who had saved her more than once in just a single day. He began to speak softly, though she could not understand. His voice was deep but gentle. He pointed at the stars visible through the crack in the cave roof and spoke as if telling a story. His eyes softened and his tone grew quiet. Lyra listened even if she could not understand the words. She wondered if he was speaking about his home far away in the stars. Did he have people waiting for him? Did he have a family? For the first time, she wished she could understand human language. When he finished, he looked at her as if waiting. She hesitated, then spoke in her own tongue, telling him her name again. Lyra Carrienne. She pointed to herself, then to the stars. Her voice grew heavy as she whispered, "Alone." Elias frowned slightly, understanding only part of it. But when she said alone, he seemed to recognize the word. His expression softened and he shook his head firmly. He pointed to himself, then to her. Elias, Lyra, not alone. Her breath caught. She repeated his words quietly, tasting them like something new. Not alone. Elias gave a small smile. Then he leaned back against the cave wall, setting his weapon on his lap. His eyes slowly closed, though his hand stayed near the gun. Lyra sat awake a while longer, staring at the faint light. His words echoed in her mind. Not alone. She touched her chest gently. For the first time since being abandoned, the heavy stone of despair in her heart felt a little lighter. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cave, Lyra felt the first warmth of hope. The next morning, they set out again. Elias wanted to search for higher ground, hoping to find signals or remains of technology. Lyra followed willingly. The climb was hard. Sharp rocks cut at their hands and loose stones slid beneath their feet. But together they reached the top of a ridge. From there, the view stretched far into the distance. Ruins. Scattered across the horizon were the broken remains of old machines, towers half buried in sand, and ships that had fallen long ago. A battlefield forgotten by time. Elias's eyes narrowed as he studied it. Perhaps within those ruins they could find parts or tools to repair his communicator. Perhaps even a way to call for rescue. He turned to Lyra, his expression determined. She followed his gaze, and though fear stirred in her, monsters would surely roam that place, she gave a small nod. Because now, she was not alone, and neither was he. That night, as they prepared for the journey to the ruins, Lyra thought again of her people. They had called her weak. They had left her to die. But Elias had shown her something different. He did not see her as useless. He saw her as someone who could survive, someone who could help. As she drifted into sleep, she whispered his words again to herself. The ruins stretched across the horizon like the bones of a dead giant. Rusted towers leaned at broken angles, half-buried ships lay scattered, and twisted metal shone faintly in the red light of the planet's sky. The land was silent, but it was not safe. Lyra knew that monsters often made their homes in abandoned places. Elias stood on the ridge, studying the view. His eyes scanned the wreckage carefully, and his hand rested near his weapon. Beside him, Lyra watched quietly. The ruins filled her with fear, yet also a strange curiosity. Somewhere in that broken land, they might find a way to survive longer, perhaps even a way to leave. Elias turned to her, pointing down toward the ruins, then to his chest and hers. His meaning was clear, they would go together. Lyra hesitated only a moment before nodding. She was afraid. but she would not stay behind. They began their descent into the ruins. The ground was uneven, filled with broken stone and sharp fragments of metal. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved between towering wrecks. Lyra stayed close to Elias, her sharp eyes scanning the shadows. At one point, Elias stopped and raised a hand. Lyra froze instantly. Ahead of them, a low growl rumbled. From the shadows crawled a beast with many legs, its body covered in thick scales. Its eyes glowed faintly and drool dripped from its long jaws. Lyra's breath caught. The creature was a fang crawler, one of the most feared hunters on the planet. It could climb walls, leap great distances, and crush prey with its jaws. Elias slowly raised his weapon, but Lyra touched his arm quickly and shook her head. The weapon was powerful but noisy. If he fired here, more creatures might come. Instead, Lyra bent low, searching the ground. She picked up a piece of sharp metal and threw it across the ruins. The sound clanged loudly against the walls. The crawler's head snapped toward the noise and it scuttled after it. Elias raised his eyebrows, slightly impressed. Lyra gave a small shrug, trying to hide the tremble in her hands. She had been forced to learn tricks like that while alone, before Elias found her. When the danger passed, they continued deeper. Learning together, hours passed as they searched. Elias examined pieces of old machines, pulling out wires, metal plates, and small devices. He handled them with care, sometimes shaking his head in disappointment when they were broken. But once in a while, he smiled faintly and placed a piece in his pack. Lyra did not understand all he was looking for, but she tried to help. She showed him which areas were dangerous to step on, which plants growing among the ruins were poisonous, and which small cracks in the walls were hiding places for creatures. In return, Elias showed her things too. He taught her how to use simple tools from his pack, how to tie a strong knot, how to set a trap using wire and rocks, and how to sharpen a piece of metal into a blade. His hands moved with confidence, and his eyes watched her carefully, making sure she understood. At first, Lyra struggled. The trap she built collapsed, the knots she tied came loose, and the blade she tried to sharpen slipped from her hands. Frustrated, she frowned and turned away, but Elias only gave her a patient look. He picked up the blade, showed her slowly again, then handed it back. This time, Lyra tried harder. Her hands trembled, but she followed each step carefully. At last, the blade took shape, its edge shining faintly. She looked up at him, waiting. Elias gave a small nod of approval. For the first time, pride warmed Lyra's chest. Her people had only called her weak. But Elias was teaching her, guiding her, and treating her like she could learn. That night, they returned to the cave with their findings. Elias built a small fire using sparks from his tool and dry pieces of plant. The fire's glow lit the walls, casting dancing shadows. Lyra sat close, holding the blade she had made. It felt real, solid, like proof that she was not useless. Elias noticed her holding it and gave a faint smile. He spoke a few words she could not understand, but the tone was kind, for the first time in her life. Lyra felt like she was becoming stronger, not because of her people, but because of the human who believed she could be. The hunt the next morning, Elias motioned for her to follow. He pointed to his mouth, then to the outside. Food. They set out together, leaving the cave behind. Elias carried his weapon, but he also carried one of the traps he had built. Lyra carried her new blade, her hands gripping it tightly. They moved carefully through the ruins until they reached a more open area, where small lizard-like creatures darted between rocks. These creatures were edible, though difficult to catch. Elias set the trap, showing her how it worked. Then they waited, crouched low. Minutes passed. One of the lizards crept near, sniffing the ground. It stepped into the trap and the wire snapped around its legs. The creature squealed, but Elias moved quickly, ending its struggle. He held it up, showing her. Lyra's eyes widened. Food. But Elias was not done. He handed her the trap, motioning for her to try. Her heart raced. She set it as he had shown her. Though her fingers fumbled with the wire, they waited again. Another lizard crept forward, drawn by the scent of the first. It stepped into the trap. The wire snapped. This time Lyra moved. She grabbed her blade, rushed forward, and struck. The lizard fell still. She stared at it, her chest rising and falling quickly. She had done it. She had hunted. Elias gave her a proud nod. That evening they cooked the meat over the fire. The taste was rough but filling. Lyra ate with quiet satisfaction. For the first time, she felt she had earned her own survival. Trust growing as the days passed. Their teamwork grew stronger. Elias taught her more about traps, weapons, and how to stay hidden from larger beasts. Lyra showed him secret places where clean water could be found and how to read the sky to predict storms. They learned to communicate with gestures, simple sounds, and expressions. It was not perfect, but it was enough. When danger came, they understood each other without needing words. One day, as they searched deeper into the ruins, they came across a wide open area where the wreck of a massive ship lay. Its broken frame still held parts of machines. Elias's eyes lit with hope as he studied it. But the place was not empty. From the shadows crawled another crawler beast, larger than the one they had seen before. Its many legs scraped the ground and its hiss echoed through the air. Lyra's blood turned cold. She gripped her blade tightly, ready to run, but Elias raised his weapon calmly, his stance firm. He glanced at her and shook his head slightly. "Don't run," the beast lunged. Elias fired, the blast striking its side. It shrieked in fury and charged again. Elias rolled aside, shouting something in his own tongue. Lyra could not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. Now, her body moved before her fear could stop her. She darted forward, slashing at the crawler's leg with her blade. The creature roared, turning toward her. Panic surged in her chest, but Elias fired again, hitting its head. Together they fought, the human with his weapon, the alien girl with her blade. And together they drove the beast back until it collapsed, unmoving. Silence filled the ruins once more. Lyra stood shaking, her blade dripping with dark liquid. Her heart pounded, but her eyes shone with a fierce light. She had faced her fear and fought beside Elias. When she looked at him, he gave her a firm nod of approval. In that moment, she realized something. She was no longer just surviving because of him. She was surviving with him. A new strength that night as they rested near the fire, Lyra thought about her people again. They had left her, believing she was too weak. But here, with Elias, she was learning to fight, to hunt, to endure. She was not weak. Elias glanced at her as she sharpened her blade by the fire. He spoke softly, saying her name. "Lyra." She looked up, meeting his steady gaze. He tapped his chest and said, "Elias." Then he pointed at her. "Lyra." Finally, he pointed to both of them together. "Strong." Lyra's eyes widened. She repeated softly, "Strong." The word filled her heart with warmth. She had never been called that before. She smiled faintly, the first true smile since her exile. Elias smiled back. The days on Arcanus passed with quiet tension. Elias and Lyra had grown used to working together, hunting for food, collecting water, and searching the ruins for useful parts. They had become a team, but the planet itself never allowed them peace. Every night the howls of monsters echoed across the land. Every storm brought danger, shaking the ground and stirring the creatures into madness. And Elias knew something worse was coming. The signs were clear, the storms were growing stronger, the beasts more restless. Arcanus was preparing for one of its great migrations, when the predators of the land gathered in vast numbers, sweeping across everything in their path. Survival during such a time was almost impossible. Elias sat near the fire one evening, sharpening a piece of metal into a spear. His eyes were focused, his jaw tight. Lyra sat across from him, hugging her knees. She had noticed the change in him. He was calm on the outside, but his movements carried a weight, as though he was preparing for something terrible. Finally, she asked softly in her own tongue, "What is wrong?" Of course, he could not understand her words. But Elias looked at her and seemed to know her question. He pointed to the sky where clouds churned like boiling smoke. Then he pointed to the dark horizon where faint roars already rumbled. Lyra's heart sank. She had heard of such migrations. Though she had never lived through one, entire colonies of her people had been wiped out when the creatures moved in endless waves. And she, without Elias, would never have lasted even a single night. Her hands tightened. Fear pressed against her chest. Elias placed the finished spear beside her, meeting her eyes. His meaning was clear. She would need to fight too. The coming storm. The next morning the sky was darker than usual. The wind howled across the land, carrying with it the cries of countless beasts. The ground trembled faintly as though warning of what was on its way. Elias and Lyra worked quickly. They moved rocks to block parts of the cave entrance, gathered sharp pieces of metal for weapons, and set traps using wire and stone. Elias showed Lyra how to brace the wall so they would not collapse in the storm. Lyra's hands shook as she worked, but she forced herself to follow each instruction carefully. Her people had called her weak, but here, beside Elias, she was determined to prove she could stand. By midday, the first wave came. From the distance, creatures appeared, small ones at first, lizard-like hunters with sharp teeth. They darted toward the cave, drawn by the scent of life. Elias fired his weapon, driving them back, while Lyra struck with her blade when one came too close. Her heart pounded, but each time she fought, her fear lessened a little. The creatures were dangerous, yes, but not unstoppable. When the last lizard fled, Lyra looked at Elias. He gave her a quick nod, then pointed to the horizon. More were coming. The second wave, as the day darkened, larger beasts appeared. Their shapes moved like shadows in the storm, massive creatures with horns, claws, and eyes glowing through the dust. The ground shook as they charged. Elias fired again and again, his weapon flashing with light. One beast fell, but another smashed into the rocks, shaking the cave walls. Lyra cried out, but she remembered the traps they had set. She grabbed one of the wires and pulled, releasing a pile of rocks onto the creature's head. The beast staggered, giving Elias the chance to fire again. Together they drove it back, but the battle was far from over. More creatures kept coming, their cries filling the air. The storm above grew worse, lightning flashing across the sky. Lyra's arms ached, her legs shook, but she did not stop. Every time she faltered, Elias was there beside her, fighting with calm focus. She drew strength from his presence. The fall, then disaster struck. A massive beast, larger than any they had seen before, emerged from the storm. Its body was covered in thick armor-like plates, and its jaws could crush stone. With a roar, it charged the cave. Elias shouted, firing his weapon, but the blasts only slowed it. He grabbed his spear and rushed forward, striking at its eye. The beast roared in fury, swinging its tail. The impact threw Elias across the cave, slamming him against the wall. He fell hard, his weapon slipping from his hand. "Elias!" Lyra's cry echoed through the storm. The beast turned its gaze toward her now, its glowing eyes filled with hunger. Fear froze her body. She wanted to run, but Elias's words came back to her. Not alone. Her grip tightened on her blade. She forced herself to stand, though her knees shook. The beast roared and lunged. Lyra's stand time seemed to slow. Lyra's mind screamed at her to flee, but her heart burned with something stronger than fear. She would not be left behind again. She would not let Elias fall because of her weakness. With a cry, she darted to the side, avoiding the beast's strike. She slashed with her blade, cutting across its leg. The wound was small compared to its size, but the creature bellowed in rage. It swung its head toward her, jaws wide. Lyra rolled aside, barely escaping. She scrambled to her feet, her chest heaving. Her body ached, but she refused to stop. Again and again she struck, using her speed to dodge its heavy blows. Sparks flew as her blade scraped its armored hide, but at last she found a weak spot near its neck. She stabbed with all her strength. The beast roared in pain, thrashing wildly. Lyra was thrown back, her blade still buried in its flesh. She hit the ground hard, gasping for air. The monster staggered, then collapsed with a thunderous crash. For a long moment, silence followed. The storm raged outside, but within the cave, only Lyra's heavy breaths filled the air. She had done it. She had stood against her greatest fear and won. Aftermath, Lyra crawled quickly to Elias's side. His armor was cracked, and blood ran from a wound on his forehead, but his chest rose and fell. He was alive. "Elias," she whispered, shaking him gently. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then finding her. Relief flooded through her. She smiled faintly, though tears blurred her vision. "Safe," she whispered. "You are safe." Elias studied her face for a moment, then gave a weak smile. He spoke softly, his voice rough, but she understood one word clearly. Strong. Her heart swelled. She pressed her hands to his wound, doing her best to stop the bleeding. It was clumsy, but she remembered how he had cared for her before. Now it was her turn. The storm raged through the night and more creatures prowled outside, but none dared approach the cave again after the fall of the great beast. Inside, Lyra kept watch beside Elias, holding her blade tightly. Her fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. She was no longer the weak girl her people had abandoned. She was something more. A new bond. When morning came, the storm had finally passed. The land outside was torn and broken, scattered with the tracks of countless beasts, But the cave still stood and Elias was alive. He sat up slowly, leaning on Lyra for support. His face was pale, but his eyes held pride as he looked at her. She met his gaze and whispered softly, repeating the word he had taught her. Strong. Elias smiled faintly and touched her shoulder, nodding in agreement. In that moment, Lyra knew something had changed. She was no longer just the girl he had saved. She was his partner in survival. Together they had faced the trial of fire, and together they had endured. The storm was gone, but the land of Arcanis still looked wounded. Black clouds drifted slowly across the sky, and the ground was scarred by the passage of countless beasts. The world smelled of dust, ash, and the faint stench of death. Inside the cave, silence rested at last. Lyra sat near the fire, watching Elias as he slept. His breathing was steady now, though his wound still needed time to heal. She had kept watch through the night, sharpening her blade, checking the traps, and listening for danger. Her body ached. Her hands were cut, and her face was streaked with dirt. But inside she felt something new, strength. She had fought against her fear, protected Elias, and faced a monster larger than any she had imagined. Her people had called her weak. They had abandoned her to die. Yet here she was, alive, strong. When Elias finally stirred, Lyra quickly moved to his side. His eyes opened slowly, still tired but alert. He gave her a faint smile, and his first word was the one he had taught her before. Strong. Lyra's lips curved into a small smile. She nodded and whispered back, Strong. For a long moment they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. No words were needed. They both knew what they had endured. A faint signal later that day, Elias motioned for Lyra to help him outside. He leaned on her shoulder as they walked, his steps heavy but determined. Together they climbed to the ridge overlooking the ruins. From there, Elias pulled out a small device he had been repairing with the parts they had gathered. It was his communicator, though still damaged. He pressed a few buttons and a faint light blinked on the screen. Static filled the air, then silence. Elias tried again. This time a broken signal crackled faintly like a voice lost in the wind. Lyra's eyes widened. Could it be? A rescue ship? Elias frowned in concentration. He adjusted the device, tapping at the wires he had carefully replaced. Finally, the static grew stronger, forming short bursts of sound. It was not clear, but it was enough to show that somewhere above, in orbit, ships were still passing by. Hope flickered in Lyra's chest. Rescue, escape, a chance to leave this cursed planet behind. Elias glanced at her, his eyes steady. He pointed to the communicator, then to the sky. His meaning was clear. If the signal was strong enough, a ship could find them, but it would take time. And until then, they would have to survive. Between two worlds, days passed as they waited. Elias worked on strengthening the communicator while Lyra hunted and gathered food. They had fallen into a rhythm, their roles clear, their bond unspoken but strong. At night, by the fire, Elias often spoke in his own language. Lyra could not understand the words, but she listened closely, learning the sound of his voice. She imagined he was telling stories of his home, of the stars beyond this world. Sometimes she spoke too. She told him in her own tongue about her people. She spoke of how the Carrion valued only strength, how they had no mercy for the weak. She told him how they had left her behind, her voice heavy with sorrow. Elias could not understand her words, but he watched her with kind eyes. He listened, and somehow that was enough. One night, as she whispered these stories, Elias reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His touch was steady, grounding her. Then he said softly, "Not alone." Her heart tightened. She repeated the words, her voice trembling but sure, "Not alone." In that moment, she felt something she had never known before. Not just survival, not just strength, but belonging. The return of fear but peace on Arcanis never lasted long. One evening, as they sat outside the cave, the communicator beeped faintly. Elias's eyes widened. A stronger signal. He adjusted the device quickly, and this time clear words came through, though broken. Human distress. Respond, coordinates. Stand by. It was a rescue signal. Lyra's breath caught. Rescue had come, but along with hope came fear. She thought of her people again. The Carrion had abandoned her, yes, but they had also taught her that humans were the enemy. What if Elias's people thought the same? What if they looked at her and saw only a threat? Would they leave her behind too? Her chest tightened as she stared at the sky. She wanted to believe she had a place with Elias, but the fear of rejection pressed against her heart like a heavy stone. Elias noticed her silence. He studied her face, then spoke gently, though she did not understand the words. Still, his tone carried reassurance. He pointed to himself, then to her, then to the communicator. His meaning was simple. We go together. Lyra wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that he would not abandon her. But deep inside, the old wounds of her people's betrayal still whispered doubts. The final trial. The night before the rescue ship was expected, the land shook again. A new storm rose, fierce and violent. Lightning split the sky and the howls of creatures grew louder. Elias and Lyra hurried to secure the cave, but the ground trembled harder than before. From the darkness, more beasts appeared, drawn by the storm, hungry and wild. Lyra's grip tightened on her blade. She looked at Elias. His face was calm, though his weapon glowed faintly with the last of its power. This would be their final trial. The beasts charged. Together they fought, Elias with his weapon, Lyra with her blade. Their movements were no longer clumsy or uncertain. They moved as one, covering each other, striking with perfect rhythm. At one point, a creature lunged at Elias from behind. Without thinking, Lyra threw herself forward, driving her blade deep into its chest. Elias turned, his eyes flashing with pride. Later, when another beast nearly crushed Lyra, Elias struck it down with his last shot, saving her in turn. The battle raged through the storm, but at last the creatures fell silent. The ground grew still again. Exhausted, Lyra sank to her knees, her chest heaving. Elias dropped beside her, his weapon empty. They had survived. Together, beyond enemies. The next morning, the storm cleared. A bright light cut across the sky, the rescue ship. Its engines roared as it descended, stirring the dust into great waves. Lyra's heart pounded. She stood beside Elias, her hands trembling. This was the moment she had both dreamed of and feared. The ship landed and its doors opened. Human soldiers stepped out, their armor shining, their weapons ready. They approached quickly, surrounding Elias. One of them saluted him, speaking rapidly in their tongue. Elias responded, his voice calm but firm. Then he pointed to Lyra. The soldiers turned their eyes toward her. Their gazes were sharp, cautious. She froze, her heart racing. Would they take her or leave her? For a long moment, silence hung heavy. Then Elias stepped forward, placing himself between her and the soldiers. His stance was clear. He would not leave her behind. He spoke firmly, his voice carrying strength. Though Lyra did not understand the words, she understood his meaning. He was declaring that she was with him. The soldiers hesitated, then slowly lowered their weapons. One of them spoke into a device and after a pause nodded. Elias turned back to her, his expression softening. He extended his hand. Lyra's breath trembled. She looked at his hand, then at the open ship behind him. The choice was hers. Her people had abandoned her, but Elias had saved her, taught her, fought beside her. He had given her a place when no one else had. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Together, they walked toward the ship, a new beginning. As the engines roared and the ship lifted from the ground, Lyra looked out the window. The cursed land of Arcanus grew smaller beneath them, its storms fading into the distance. For the first time, she was leaving the planet not as a prisoner, not as a castaway, but as someone who had chosen her path. Elias sat beside her, his presence steady and warm. He looked at her, and for the first time she dared to smile fully. Her people had told her humans were enemies. But she had learned the truth. Humans could be cruel, yes, but they could also be kind, brave, and loyal. Elias was proof of that, and she, once abandoned, was no longer alone. As the ship carried them into the stars, Lyra whispered softly to herself, in both her tongue and his, "Not alone."